Story 1. In my early 20s, I did not care. My thought process was that it wasn't me cheating. As I have gotten older and experienced being cheated on, I realized that this is not a good way to behave. It is not something I want to do to anyone else, making them feel the way I felt when I discovered I was cheated on. Story 2. Just beautiful. I thought if she was willing to jeopardize her marriage for me, things must not be right for her, and I felt I was worth it. I imagined that the marriage was the mistake, not the infidelity. My immature self sought validation for my ego. Story 3. I swear, being married is a kink for some men. It's as if they want that married woman to be so attracted to them that she's willing to risk it all just for their attention. I have a friend who almost exclusively dates women who are either married or in long-term relationships. We would joke about it being his kink, but after a couple of years, we realized that was exactly what was happening. One woman I was friends with started seeing him on the side. She eventually left her fiancé for him, and then he wanted nothing to do with her anymore, as if she wasn't even attractive to him once she became single. Story 4. I know a man in his 40s who regularly drives for hours to meet up with his high school girlfriend to be intimate in a hotel room. They sneak around because she is long-term married with children. He mentioned to me that he told her she shouldn't be doing that to her family, but he is happy to assist and feels no responsibility. Story 5. There is a man at my gym who actively seeks relationships with married women. He knows they won't reveal anything, and he keeps his infidelity with the mother of his child discreet, as he never brings them home. Story 6. She told me she was leaving an emotionally abusive husband, that they were splitting up, and she didn't know how to support her kids without him. This went on for 6 months. Like a fool, I took her in emotionally and did what I could to support her. It was all a lie. She had told the same story to multiple other men over the years, claiming they were her soulmates, that she needed help, and that she was being abused. It took me 5 years to get over the lies, the manipulation, the cheating, and the emotional mess she left me in. Story 7. I always found it easier, honestly. When I was younger, I noticed that a married woman at the bars without her husband seemed to be out because she wanted to hook up. Single girls can take a guy home whenever, so there's no rush. However, a married woman only has a limited time frame to hook up, so they always seemed ready to go. Story 8. A woman told me she was finalizing her divorce, so we started a strictly casual relationship. 3 months passed with no update on her divorce. One day, I decided to look her up on Facebook and saw that she had posted a family picture 3 days ago. I called her out on it, and she said she was trying to fix her marriage. I reminded her that we had just hooked up 2 days ago, and it seemed unlikely that she was making real progress. We hung out one last time, and I told her she needed to cut me off to fully focus on her marriage. Otherwise, it wasn't really fixing anything. It was just meeting her needs while maintaining a facade. So we ended things. Story 9. All the taste of a relationship and none of the calories of commitment. Then I sobered up and that behavior disappeared. Story 10. I didn't really plan on it, but we had both been drinking and it just happened. She had already begun the separation and divorce process before that point, so I don't feel very guilty about it. Story 11. Just my wife. I have no idea where or how a married person can find the time to be unfaithful. Between work, taking care of the house, cooking, and spending time with my wife and child, I barely have time to sleep, much less engage in infidelity. I am an amateur astronomer. My wife knows that once a month, if the weather is good, I leave on a Saturday night and go out a few hours into the remote countryside with my telescopes, and I am all alone surrounded by coyotes and sometimes farm dogs. That's about as exciting as it gets for us. Story 12. What most people don't realize is that usually the woman will pursue you, not the other way around. People often expect that a married woman is in a happy relationship and is seduced by another man, but in reality she is usually desperately unhappy, no longer in love, not having her needs met, and wanting validation and affection. Story 13. My ex, who married the guy she left me for, is still with him years later but is unhappy. Naively, I agreed to be friends with her again. One night, while we were both out, she came over and we ended up having sex. She claimed that sleeping with me was her intention all along because he stopped giving her attention. She wanted to make it a regular thing with me because she missed the intimacy we shared. I didn't want to be part of someone else's drama, so I told her we could still be friends, but that wouldn't happen again. We stopped talking after I began a relationship with someone else. Sorry, there was no happy ending. It was a mistake that could have led to a much worse outcome. Story 14. We became friends and she often complained about her husband, including that they don't have a sexual relationship anymore, and when they do, he seems disinterested. She was surprised that I came, as her husband hasn't reached orgasm with her in years, she said. She honestly believed she was the reason he couldn't experience pleasure anymore, since he would achieve it through masturbation. I have no regrets about it. Story 15. One fleeting encounter, she initiated everything. I had the mindset of it's not my responsibility to save your marriage, so I went along with it. I'm not proud of it, but it is what it is. Story 16. The fact that her husband was there watching and encouraging is enjoyable. It may not be everyone's preference, and it is not my favorite, but it is fun to try with friends. Story 17. My old friend was aware of the situation. I told him I thought it was not right, and he replied, "She's the one cheating, not me." There seemed to be some troubling justification in his mind. I think he just had a rare opportunity and wasn't going to turn it down. Story 18. She didn't tell me until after it was done. Then I received strange, threatening texts and calls from someone. I guess she shared the information with him too. What a tangled web she weaves. Story 19. She was just out of jail, living with someone else since her husband had kicked her out, and I figured the conflicting circumstances weren't going to align like that again. Story 20. I spent about 2 years in my late 30s very deliberately dating and sleeping with married women in ethically open relationships. While it's been a few years since my last experience, I still occasionally do so. After getting divorced and starting to date again, I wasn't ready to begin anything serious. I explained to the women I was seeing that I just wanted to keep things somewhat casual. However, my style was, and still usually is, to be intimate, connected, and engage in deep conversations in addition to physical intimacy. I find it hard to be solely physical because I take pleasure in genuinely getting to know people in other ways as well. Consequently, I often found myself in situations where things became more serious than I intended, and my dates were frustrated and confused that we were getting so close while I wasn't ready for any exclusivity or long-term commitments. So, I decided to exclusively date married women in open relationships. I adjusted my profile and searches on dating apps and used various other forms to meet polyamorous or ethically non-monogamous individuals. When I met them, I expressed my intentions, explaining that I wanted to be myself with them, enjoy great sex and connections, but understood they had a life partner, husband, home, children, etc. to return to and wouldn't expect that from me. It worked quite well. I had fulfilling experiences and was able to engage in my preferred style, truly enjoying the time spent with them. Some were in very happy marriages with plenty of intimacy with their husbands, while others were in situations where their sexual lives with their husbands were lacking but had agreements to remain together while seeking that intimacy elsewhere. Both types were enjoyable in different ways, the former being, "You're an insatiable lover that can't get enough of your husband, me, and even other partners," and the latter presenting, "I'm the one who can fulfill you in ways that aren't met at home." Eventually, my needs and availability for different types of relationships evolved, and I opened up to dating single women again. Over the past 15 years, I've experienced a range of different relationship structures, including occasionally still connecting with married women who were ethically non-monogamous. Story 21. I was young. She was my childhood crush, and we had known each other since we were kids. She married someone who wasn't great. We reconnected through friends. She started traveling my way, and we had many mutual friends. Eventually, she made a move on me. I was shocked, but the little part of me inside was excited. So we became intimate more than once, but we didn't establish a relationship. It became awkward. I still care a lot for her, but I haven't seen her in over a decade. I hope she's doing well. She has been unmarried for a long time now. Story 22. If you've ever slept with a married woman, you would know they are some of the most passionate and neglected women. The ones I have connected with were truly remarkable. Story 23. My grandparents and my uncle passed away within a few months. I witnessed my uncle die from amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which was very traumatic for me. He was 45. I was helping take care of him during that time. My struggles with unmedicated mental illness and psychosis, along with experiencing homelessness, left me feeling vulnerable, bitter, apathetic, and existential. I dated her years prior in high school, but I was very poor and couldn't even see her when my older friend, who was over 6 years older, asked if he could date her after taking me to a fast food restaurant. I said yes, but I didn't think she'd be interested. Fast forward 9 years later, after all the deaths and my failures, they are married, but she starts trying to be my friend. I was hesitant at first, but after a few weeks of friendship, she tells me they are in the process of getting a divorce. Then one night, she kissed me, and it all went downhill from there. If it helps at all, she did the same exact thing to me 10 years later. Never again. Story 24. I met a woman at work who told me she was divorced. After a few weeks, we became friendly and spent the night together. I later discovered that she was still married and that her husband was a long-distance truck driver. She had been involved with many other men. I felt terrible about the situation, but it was the least bad I had felt after experiencing a breakup in my entire dating life. Story 25. She was in a mentally abusive relationship and wanted to leave but was tied to a lease. She told me they had not had sex in a year and a half. She spent weekends at my house, and her husband wouldn't call or even send a single text. When she got home, he did not ask where she was. They slept in separate rooms. I didn't feel bad at all. Story 26. I knowingly slept with a married woman when I was in my early 20s. For me, it was partly the thrill of cheating. I had met her husband a few times, and he was a complete jerk, so I didn't care. It doesn't justify my actions, and now I realize how wrong it was of me to do that. Story 27. I didn't know the term at the time, but I instinctively understood her to be someone who would not leave a relationship without the next one securely in her grasp. Basically, I thought I had a chance to win her over. Narrator, he did not have a chance to win her over. This episode is one of the very few things I am ashamed of in my life. I am embarrassed about plenty of things, but I am ashamed of that. Story 28. She said, "We're separated." At 3 a.m., I heard, "You have to go. My husband is home." I thought she was separated. She replied, "He was at work. I was home." I jumped out of the second-floor window in just my underwear and landed in 2 feet of snow, with all my clothes in my arms. I got dressed and walked home, shaking my head the whole way. Story 29. I was young and naive. I believed it was her mistake to live with, not mine. At the time, I didn't really know her husband, and I was getting what I wanted, so I wasn't going to complain. A few years later, I got a job and ended up working with him. At first, it didn't bother me, but then we started getting along. I discovered he was a decent person, and I was the one who had slept with his wife. I always told myself I would come clean, but they had a child together, and I didn't want to disrupt their lives. It's something I will always feel guilty about for the rest of my life. Story 30. I didn't care because I didn't think it mattered. After therapy for depression and trauma, which helped me feel emotions and empathy again, I realized how unkind I had been. I don't want to be the cause of anyone's suffering. Story 31. I had just gone through a breakup and wanted to cause as much trouble as I could. However, I stopped after the first instance because I realized I was being a terrible person. I have major regrets. Story 32. When you marry, you make the biggest promise. Don't ask someone to be there through sickness when you are threatening their health. I am a woman who has had married men ask for sex. It is disgusting how they proudly announce what untrustworthy creatures they are because they chose physical pleasure over being an actual partner. I feel the same regardless of gender. Story 33. When I was 19, I met a 34-year-old woman through a dating app. I was inexperienced and she was my first kiss. I lost my virginity to her. First, everything was great. However, not long after, I found out she was actually married and had a daughter. Unfortunately, She convinced me that she was in an open relationship and that her husband knew everything. We kept meeting for about another month until one night, when we were supposed to meet, she was running late, so I called. She got mad that I tried to call her and mentioned that her husband was being nosy, but I didn't think much of it. After this incident, I discovered she was separating from her husband, and that's when I figured he found out and what she told me earlier was a lie. I feel extremely guilty because I can't stop thinking that I am the reason a little girl is growing up without her father. Looking back, all the signs were there. We never met at her house, only in motels and her car. We would meet at odd hours, either during work hours when I was supposed to be in school or late at night. I was foolish not to see the signs. Story 34. I was young and impulsive, and she was a willing participant. I wouldn't do it now that I'm older. Story 35. We met in the mental ward and became friends, sharing experiences. During that time, she mentioned that her husband traveled for work. When I was being released, she asked for my information so we could stay in touch. Long story short, we became intimate. As far as how it turned out in the end, it went about as well as you might expect. Being intimate is one thing. Dealing with emotional instability is another. It turns out that "thou shalt not commit adultery" is good advice. Story 36. I can't wait to sleep with my partner. I'm getting engaged soon, and I'm really excited for our future together. For clarification, all three roles, girlfriend, fiancé, and wife, refer to the same person. Story 37. Nothing had to push me. People make choices. It's not my job to keep another person happy. I don't owe anyone anything unless they are a friend, family member, or helping me in business. Other people don't even draw those lines. Most women do not cheat easily. Some do, but most don't, especially when their partner does not treat them well. Main reasons women cheat. 1. Their partner doesn't listen to them. 2. Their partner does not ensure their needs are met during intimacy. 3. Their partner doesn't spend quality time with them. 4. Their partner doesn't take them out to do anything. Keep in mind that I am meeting these needs by only hanging out a couple of hours a week. If you're only taking 5 minutes or less, then you're done. Not making dinner occasionally, not listening when she wants to talk, not fixing things around the house or car, not taking her anywhere, and not being there when she needs you. I was 20 at the time, and there was a woman who had a child who wanted to play basketball with friends. She let the child play basketball with me and my friends. She was 28, the child was 10, and her husband was around 40. He worked 12-hour days and owned a luxury car. He didn't work weekends. On Saturdays, he spent the day playing golf and then went to a bar or restaurant afterward. Sundays were for gambling and watching football with friends. For months, every Saturday, while the husband played golf, it was basketball at the gym from 9 to 11. Then we would relax and do whatever from 11 to 3. The husband never got home before 4. I asked once if we could chill on other days, but she said no. Saturday was the perfect time. It was when he could be there but wasn't. Story 38. I was in my early 20s when I met a pretty, middle-aged lady and her friend at the local bar. After having too many drinks and on the way back to my house, I asked if she was seeing anyone, married or dating. I wasn't sure how to politely ask. Her response was, "I'm pretty much divorced, but then again he doesn't know I'm here. Good enough for me." I didn't make any promises. Story 39. She did. We were on the couch just watching a movie and drinking when she suddenly looked at me and asked why we weren't kissing. That then led to intimate moments on the couch. Story 40. I used to engage in relationships with women who were already involved with someone else before I entered my current relationship. It began in college when I was involved with women who were taken, such as other men's girlfriends, married women, and fiancés. The first time happened by accident. I met a girl at a party, and while we were hooking up, she mentioned that I was bigger than her boyfriend. That turned me on. She didn't inform me before we were intimate that she had a boyfriend. She continued to talk provocatively, and I found that exciting, knowing she was with someone else while being intimate with me. We kept hooking up frequently, all while she had a boyfriend. I eventually started seeking out women who were in relationships or married online. In my late 20s, I realized how wrong my behavior was and decided to stop hooking up altogether. I wasn't looking for a relationship, but I met my current girlfriend, and we have been together for several years now. Story 41. I had a conversation with a coworker and learned that her husband was in jail. We had already been involved several times before I discovered this. I ended the relationship upon finding out, and she resigned a couple of weeks later. Story 42. Their marriage is completely over, and they remain together because it is easier to raise two children that way. Story 43. It is difficult to pinpoint one specific reason. It was more a combination of factors that created a flirty environment. I never really thought she would go for it, and I do not think she did either, but we continued flirting for the fun of it, and all of a sudden it was happening. There was also a multi-layered forbidden element to it. She was significantly older than me, which was intriguing and enjoyable. I would be lying if I said that the idea of her being married and taking a risk to be with me was not part of it too. Ultimately, those factors converged, and a "you only live once" mindset took over. Story 44. I live in Japan, and I believe some context is key here. The first time it happened, I had no idea until she told me a few months into our arrangement. I contemplated leaving, but by then we had already hooked up several times, so there was no changing the past. I was also in a difficult place personally and needed this particular arrangement. This situation occurred a few more times, as well as with some of my friends. As it turns out, foreign men in Japan are popular choices for women who want to cheat. We generally do not speak the local language, and our social circles are completely different. Most men leave after a few years of living here, which provides a high degree of secrecy for these women. Additionally, they get the bonus of trying something new and different. One friend was serious about a girl he was dating, but we found out that she secretly had a Japanese boyfriend to whom she was engaged. Eventually, I became okay with it, as most of these women have partners who are not interested in them sexually. Many of these men might also be unfaithful themselves. Cheating culture in Japan is different. People will still get upset if it is discovered, but they are often more willing to look the other way as long as everything remains discreet. Currently, I have a side job as an erotic massage therapist, and the vast majority of my clients are married. I estimate that 30 to 40% of them attend with the knowledge and blessing of their husbands. Some even receive the money for it from their husbands. Enjoy. Story 45. When I was 21 and in my first proper job after university, my manager warned me that I would receive a lot of attention from women, mostly aged 40 and over. I didn't really understand it because I didn't see myself as particularly special. What I later realized was that she wasn't saying it because I was attractive, but rather because many of these middle-aged women were going through divorces or difficult marriages, and I would seem like an easy target for them. Needless to say, she was right. I started receiving many messages, including inappropriate pictures and very suggestive messages. As a young man, I didn't have the willpower or self-discipline to say no. I indulged. What surprised me was how conventional most of the women were in the bedroom compared to women my own age. I assumed this was due to older women being more faithful to one partner, marrying at young ages, and therefore not being as experienced or adventurous. One woman even invited me over with the promise of a Chinese takeaway and a new tablet. Story 46. She said her husband came out as transgender, told her he didn't love her anymore, started dressing as a woman and picking up men at bars. The final straw was when he wanted her to engage in a sexual practice with him. She mentioned they only stayed together for the children. Additionally, she had not had intimacy in years, so she felt a strong desire for it. Story 47. I guess she wasn't quite married, but in a relationship of about 4 years. Let's just say they're still going strong, and I fell in love like a fool. I'm happy for them, though I guess true love wins. Honestly, everyone, don't participate in adultery. It hurts everyone except those two, I suppose. Story 48. She was my brother's mistress, and they were both married. She fell for me while I was going through a bad breakup, having just come out of the hospital for alcohol poisoning. I needed someone to love me, but I chose wrong. We had a great affair. I called her husband, threatened him, and outed her to him. I threatened my brother's life and eventually went to rehab. I have been sober for almost 2 years now and haven't spoken to anyone since. It was the best and worst decision I have ever made in my adult life. Love is a powerful emotion. Story 49. I attended a party once and saw a girl with her husband. He seemed very insecure and controlling. I had gone to the party with my girlfriend. I sensed that the girl was interested in me. About a year later, we ended up working together. She confided in me about her on and off relationship due to her husband's erratic behavior. She knew I had a girlfriend and saw other girls bringing me lunch or picking me up. We started to get along, and she would often vent about her husband and flirt with me. I didn't want to create any problems. One day, she was crying and said she needed a friend to talk to. So we went to a viewpoint where we had hung out with a group of coworkers. While we were talking, she vented her frustrations and suddenly jumped into the back seat and pulled me with her. She initiated intimacy and we hooked up a few times, which she asked me to keep secret, likely because of our coworkers. One day, I texted her casually, just to check in, not intending anything sexual. Her husband took her phone that day. When I answered a call from her phone, it was him, and he went on a threatening rant about what he would do to me. I ended up sleeping with her several more times because of the way he confronted me. Eventually, I spoke to her friend, who was a completely different person. 15 years later, we are still together. Story 50. If married women are involved with other men, that relationship is already over, and the same applies in reverse. Story 51. I didn't make any promises. The only people who can ruin a marriage are the individuals in the marriage. If your wife comes on to me, you can blame me all you want. But we both know it's only because you're unwilling to accept the truth that you made a poor choice. The same goes for the other side. If your partner cheats, they are to blame. There is no point in blaming the other person. Story 52. My wife's best friend came down in her underwear, and it was game over. We are now married with 3 children. Turns out my wife was cheating on me, and she knew. Story 53. For a long time, I believed I was seducing married women. It was strange when I realized that most of the time I was the one being seduced. Still, I have no regrets. Story 54. Since college, I have slept with several married women in the United States and abroad. I guess I have my father to thank for showing me the ropes, as he was unfaithful to my mother. It is complicated since both my parents were sometimes separated more due to work than problems in their relationship. College for me was probably the peak. Looking back, I don't think I sought that out purposefully, but it happened far too often for it to be a coincidence. After college, I got a good job that allowed me to travel. The Caribbean was quite the playground. More often than not, they wouldn't tell me they were married, but eventually it came out. All this playing around has convinced me that marriage is a folly and a zero-sum game. True love is so rare that you shouldn't count on it. Story 55. I never had any real game. I am just terrible with women. For some reason, I found it easy to talk to women who were married or in a relationship. It was always the same. We'd start as friends, then they would use me to vent about their relationship, and then we would hook up. It was the only way I could get involved. Now that I'm older and married, I see it was not the right thing to do. However, I wouldn't say I have any regrets. I had fun, they had fun, and I never had to deal with complicated aftermath. Story 56. I knew she puts out. Look at those kids. This is a joke. My wife is my favorite person to sleep with. Story 57. My friend, who migrated to Florida's West Coast Gulf area, worked at shore bars. He mentioned that he wouldn't have known they were married until he woke up the next day and saw the sunburned outline of a ring on her finger. I have never forgotten that one. Here's a quick story. He once woke up with a married woman who had no idea where she was or who he was. She turned over and asked, "Who are you?" Then she started panicking. Story 58. I met her on a dating app years ago. We flirted and ended up sending each other selfies. I was wearing a suit and she asked where I worked. She mentioned she lived just 3 minutes away from my workplace and wanted me to come over right then, wearing my suit. I arrived at her place in the afternoon. She opened the door, grabbed me by my tie, and pulled me inside. Without exchanging many words, we kissed, and she quickly became half naked. She turned around, bent over the backrest of her couch, and we began to have sex. I spanked her, and she said, "You can't leave any marks. My husband will be back with the kids in an hour or so." I figured since I was already inside her, I might as well finish. Story 59. The only married women I have slept with either had permission to engage in relationships or were in the process of getting divorced. Story 60. She was attractive and my type. I was hers. She hadn't seen her husband in almost a decade. She was also extremely unstable and clingy. I nearly had to get a restraining order. She showed up at my place in the middle of the night, followed me to the grocery store, and stopped by my office, which I never revealed the location of. It was intense. Story 61. She was looking for a reason to leave and wanted to test the waters because she didn't believe she could be intimate with another person. Turns out she could. The next day, she ended the marriage and never contacted me again. Story 62. Guy was difficult to work with and often unpleasant. Thankfully, we had overlapping days off, and I joined the gym he recommended because he claimed it was the best in the area. That's when I met her. Story 63. They are in an open relationship. He thinks I am a good person, and that means he can sleep with other women. There was no need for much encouragement given the circumstances, as no cheating was involved. Story 64. This was years ago. I was young. She was a rebellious 24-year-old with a shotgun marriage due to the birth of their daughter. I think I was around 19 or 20 at the time. We met through a family member she went to school with. It felt so natural at the time, but ultimately, I think she just wanted to prove to him that she was desirable. Think hippie chick minus the dreads, tapestries adorning her little house. I'd go over to smoke cannabis. Smoking cannabis in small homes takes me back. There was genuine attraction, and her daughter took a liking to me. I think that was the key to everything. She was so sweet, and I was great with kids, so everything clicked. We tried cocaine, it was my first time. But I acted like it wasn't, right? I crushed it down with my ID, which I still have, with a cocaine rock indent as a reminder. I took all the pointers from every movie I saw. Mind you, I was experimenting with drugs at the time and occasionally crushed some pills. So I wasn't completely new to all this. As everyone knows, cocaine leads to extreme levels of horniness. The kind that gets you sent to horny jail. Except, in real life, I ended up staying the night once. I didn't regret it then, but I do now. I'd like to think it was just the cocaine, but ultimately I'm wiser now and know I wouldn't ever overstep like that again. Remember that ID? Well, the next day I couldn't find it. I figured I left it over there and thought I'd be back. So what was the point? She couldn't find it either. There was a period of time, more than a day and less than a week, when I was without an ID. I had to get a new one. Turns out her daughter snatched my ID in the morning and put it in her toy chest. Wanna guess who found it? It wasn't her mother. It was her father. Cue me being in the middle of a confusing love triangle. I never got involved in that situation again. I wisely distanced myself from it and will never do so again unless they're in divorce proceedings, and even then. Story 65. I graduated from college at 22 years old with very limited experience. She was older and I worked with her. I knew she was married. I had met her husband. She initiated our relationship, and I didn't resist. I was just happy to be involved. More than 30 years later, I realized it was wrong, but at the time I didn't care. Story 66. I was young and it was there. We met at work, and she was 10 years older than me and very flirtatious. She eventually asked me out for drinks after work. We never made it to the bar and ended up in a parking lot. After that, every day we worked together, she would ask me about my lunch plans. She would then take me in her car to get coffee, which she paid for, and drive us to a drive-up style place. While we waited for our food, she would top me off. She also bought my food. On some weekends and after work, we would be intimate. One day, she approached me asking about my lunch plans, but let me know that her husband was going to meet her for lunch. I think it was to warn me not to say anything, But I wasn't gonna anyway because I was in my early 20s, and they had a child. I wasn't trying to be a stepdad. Anyway, I saw the child walk in because she had brought her child in before, and then I saw this guy with the child. He looked like a character from a movie, with leg braces and all kinds of issues. Turned out he had a medical condition. I continued for a little while longer but eventually had to stop due to guilt. This might sound like an unbelievable story, but I assure you it's true. I'm an average guy in every way. I don't know what attracted her to me, and I haven't had anything like this happen since, so who knows? Story 67. She approached me. Her husband was my supervisor at work and unpleasant. Felt like redemption, and she was attractive as well. I have no regrets. Story 68. I'm polyamorous. Every time the husband has been okay, I've gone out to dinner first. It's a good icebreaker joke, but seriously, I'm not a fan of the don't ask/don't tell approach, and I like to make sure the husband is actually on board. Story 69. She was attractive and they were non-monogamous, so I thought, why not? I was in my mid-20s, coming out of a rough breakup and needed someone to focus on for a while. Story 70. Her husband was recently deported, and we connected while looking for friendship. She asked for pictures, thought I was handsome, and sent me hers. She is easily the hottest woman I have ever been with to this day. We agreed to meet for breakfast, but the place was closed for the day. Then she asked if I lived nearby. I could barely get up the stairs before she was all over me. It did not help my sense of self-control that I was somewhat inexperienced at the time. She was incredible. I had never experienced anything like that before. Story 71. She mentioned that she was in an open marriage. Aside from that, she was genuinely interesting, and I enjoyed our conversations. She also had one of the best figures I've ever seen. Additionally, I had always wanted to be with a married woman, and this seemed like a less sleazy way to do so. We still catch up occasionally. She recently had twins, so congratulations to her. Story 72. I have a friend who enjoys being involved with women who are married or in relationships. It is very clear that this behavior boosts his self-esteem. Story 73. Nothing pushed me. I was attracted. It only happened once. I did feel bad about it, but when it happens, you aren't thinking clearly. Story 74. She was my high school girlfriend, and when I returned home after college, I ran into her and her husband. He was rude and boasted about being intimate with her before I even knew his name. She texted me to apologize for his behavior and invited me to stop by for a free coffee the next day at her workplace. As I was on my way, she asked me to pick her up for her shift and answered the door without any clothes on. Turned out she had called in sick. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.